All right, what is up, everybody? This is Alex once again, not with the EOT Newsflash. Well, it's under the banner of because it's on the YouTube channel, but this is not a magic related event whatsoever. This is a brand new project that I have decided to undertake. I've been planning this for a little over a week now when I first decided to kick this off, but I was watching Teen Titans: The Judas Contract a couple weeks ago, and I thought, how much fun would it be to review these movies? I love the DC, comic books, the superhero movies. I love Marvel. I love superheroes in general, and so I was watching the Judas Contract, and I thought this might be kind of fun to go back and review. But then I thought, why start there? Why not start at the beginning? And I mean all the way at the back of the beginning, with the very first movie in the DC animated movie universe. Now, a bit of a disclaimer here, that does not include Mask of the Phantasm or Return of the Joker, the Batman Beyond movie that came out right around the time that series ended, or right in the middle of it. I can't remember exactly. But they are not officially considered part of that universe. They're more in line with the actual DC animated show universe, Justice League, the original Batman cartoon, the Superman cartoons that were on in the early 90s, that I absolutely loved, and probably is the biggest reason why I am the way I am today when it comes to superheroes and just nerd stuff in general. I absolutely love those shows, and that really shines through in my appreciation of these movies. So that's your background there. So I decided to go all the way to the beginning of the official start of the DC animated movie universe back in 2007 with Superman Doomsday. You see the cover up there? Super striking cover. And that's why I wanted to start off with this review series. They've made movies consistently from 2007 up till now. It's about so roughly 10 years of movies. I think there's about 17 movies altogether in it, and I'm going to be doing all of them. I'm not quite sure what I've gotten myself into, but it should be fun. There are some real high points to this movie universe, and there are some real low points to this movie universe, and going back and getting to watch all of them again with a little bit more of a critical eye, I thought would be kind of fun instead of just watching them for pure popcorn entertainment value. So basically what I wanted to do was kind of give my overall thoughts on these movies. I'm not going to be assigning a grade, so to speak. I'm just going to be giving my overall thoughts on them, what I liked, what I didn't like, cast, things like that. And I just thought it'd be kind of fun to do like a retrospective look back at the movies that have been coming out that really kind of followed the universe that I loved growing up as a kid. The original Batman cartoon came out in 1993. I was 5. I mean, game over right there. As a young impressionable child, I was finished. I mean, I can imagine a lot of you guys remember watching that cartoon, just remembering how dark and gritty it was, and just how wonderfully it kind of showed us the universe of Batman, after we got to see the Tim Burton films of the early 90s, and, things went forward as we kind of got into, the Joel Schumacher films, which will not be talked about on this channel, at least not yet. But we're not talking about Batman today. We'll get to talk about Batman soon enough, though. He has plenty of his own movies within this universe, but as we're going to kick it off right here at the beginning, Superman Doomsday, It's No Death of Superman. Like I said, this came back out in 2007. I had just graduated high school. I was moving into college. So this kind of came out at a good point in my life to kind of dig back into old entertainment that I had enjoyed. The Justice League cartoon was over. It had been over since about 2003, and this kind of picked up, with the animation style. Bruce Timm is the overall director for this. He's the guy who basically created the DC animated universe, and it's just kind of, you can tell it's a passion project of his to kind of keep telling stories with these characters. And so they kicked off this big project with Superman Doomsday. Stars Adam Baldwin, no relation to the actual Baldwin brothers, as Clark Kent / Superman, who does a surprisingly good job, when you grow up with the voice of Tim Daly in the original Superman cartoon and George Newbern in the more recent projects, DC projects, Justice League and things like that. He does a pretty good imitation. He kind of puts his own spin on it. He does a really good Clark voice. You can tell that there is there's not as much of a difference as I would like there to have been between the Superman and the Clark Kent voice, but that's a minor nitpick. Unlike Kevin Conroy, who really sort of defined the Bruce Wayne and the Batman voice back in the '90s cartoon, but he does a really good job there. James Marsders as Lex Luthor, Spike from the Buffy series. He's Lex Luthor and does an insanely good job at portraying Lex not so much as just this sort of power-hungry megalomaniac, but as sort of a more business-minded. There's a really great scene where he's standing in front of the view of Metropolis, and he's designing a cure for the common cold or cancer or something like that. And you can tell, and his assistant Marcy comes up and asks him what he's working on, and he says, I can cure this with a single inoculation. Take it down to R&D, have him slow it to a crawl, and just these really, really striking lines of you can tell that he's not just this maniac. He's evil, but there's a method to the madness, and I really enjoyed him there. He delivers some really great lines throughout this entire film. Probably one of my favorite characters. We also have Anne Hesh as Lois Lane, who kind of annoying if I'm being completely honest. Dana Delaney voiced her in the original Superman cartoon, and I also believe in the Justice League cartoons. And her voice is just a little grating. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just grating, but she does a serviceable job. There's also a couple, other minor characters. We have John DiMaggio playing Toyman, who voiced Bender, obviously. There's a small bit cameo by Kevin Smith as the Grumpy Man, I believe, as he's dubbed in the credits. But overall, the actors in this movie, the voice talent is all very good. I don't believe that this was done. And I'm gonna have to double check myself throughout these entire reviews because there's a lot of content. To cover again. I don't believe it was Andrea Romano who did a lot of the voice talent for the original DC animated universe. But I do believe she comes back later on, and once we get to those movies, I'll definitely make sure to credit her where her credit is due, because she finds the best voice talent for these movies. When it comes to I think of the Marvel movies where Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans really embody the characters they play, Iron Man and Captain America respectively. They embody that character, and the voices that she found to voice these iconic characters that we've all grown up with over the years, they encapsulate it. Nobody can dispute the fact that Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman, and probably the greatest Batman of all time for that matter. Tim Daly is probably just the definitive voice of Superman, and George Newbern to an extent as well. So, but that being said, all the voice actors in this movie do a really good job at servicing this project, and I think for the very first go around, an unproven sort of concept for the DC universe, it might have been tricky to get some of those original voice talent actors in. So I'm glad they got who they did. They did a great job, I think. Another great highlight of this movie, from the very get-go, after there's a really great introductory narration by James Marsders as Lex Luthor. He kind of talks about, how he views Superman and how he's a god and how he can bring a god down. We launch into the opening theme, which is done by Robert Krall, who does a couple of the other soundtracks for some of these other movies we'll get to eventually, and does a really great job at setting the tone for this movie. Very triumphant, bombastic horns. It's no John Williams, obviously. I mean, that's just a given. You can never do better than John Williams' original Superman score from the Christopher Reeve movies. That's just not going to happen. So, did what he did. Kudos to him. I imagine when he gets the phone call, they're like, "Hey, Mr. Krall, we'd like you to score the new Superman animated movie." He just goes, "Oh crap! Oh no!" And I think back to the original 1990s animated series, which had such bright and colorful music to it. There's a lot to live up to. So, it's not they've got a pedigree already that's been established by previous projects. And like I said before, with the voice actors, they hit the mark. For what they're trying to accomplish here, they do a really damn good job. So really, really great. My one critique of it will be that the horn section is a little bit overused. As soon as Superman does anything heroic, bah, 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 bah. Yeah, we get it. He's done something heroic. We get that. That's fine. Anyway, so let's talk about the plot. Superman Doomsday starts off With Lex, he's doing an excavation project where he discovers this sort of space capsule, which he accidentally unleashes Doomsday from, which is this giant monster that's bent on literally killing everything. That's what he's programmed to do. They kind of change up the origin there. I by him no means a comic expert, so I am bound to make some inaccurate statements about different characters. But I do know that his original creation, he has not just been encased in earth, waiting to be dug up. So he escapes. He goes on a rampage. He lands in Metropolis. Superman shows up. They beat the ever-loving hell out of each other, and they kill each other. Seemingly. So Doomsday dies. He's gone literally 10 minutes in this movie and doesn't show up ever again. At that point, the world weeps for the death of Superman. Superman triumphantly returns somehow to save some children from Toyman attacking them. It turns out that it's actually spoilers, this movie is 10 years old. I'm going to spoil this movie and probably all the movies henceforth. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, go and see them. Superman shows up. It's actually revealed to be a clone that Lex Luthor has, engineered after retrieving the body. And he's kind of unhinged. You can kind of tell that he's not quite right in the head, Superman that is. And it's all part of Lex's plan to kind of, just bring the Man of Steel to his knees and, rule the world or whatever with Superman at his side. He's got a cloning facility where he's going to make 1 million of these things. Superman's robot manages to save the body from Lex Luthor's lab, resuscitates him. He flies into action because he realizes that Superman, the clone, has become a little bit unhinged, and Lex Luthor can't control him anymore. They fight, as it were, and Superman proper beats the clone when he drops his memorial site onto a weakened Superman clone after he'd been weakened by kryptonite, and drops a gravestone memorial type rock thing. It's the emblem of Superman on him, and that's kind of how he does him in. All things I'll go back to normal. Clark reveals to Lois that he is Superman, and they live happily ever after. So that's pretty much the plot. It's super basic. For the first go around with this DC animated universe movie series, it's about as basic as you can get, but it's still a pretty good starting point, I think. What better movie to start off with than The Death of Superman? The next movie that we'll get to is actually, I think, a better jumping off point, but I think they needed to prove themselves with this movie going forward. And I'm actually going to get the whole list of these movies up just so I don't make a mistake. Okay, I'm right about that. So yeah, good starting point. Now, let's get into things that I like about this movie. And there are a lot of things. I've already talked about the soundtrack, the magnificent horn section that Robert Krall put together. It is a little overused whenever Superman does something, heroic. Ba, 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 ba. Yeah, we get it. He's done something heroic. Fantastic. And there aren't a lot of variations on that theme, but there are enough to make it, different, so it's not just the same repetitive horn section over and over and over. The soundtrack does a really good job at setting the tone, though. Again, the voice actors all do a really great job. There's also little great one-liners. I love Lex Luthor's "oh hell" moment just before the clone sort of just goes nuts on him. Absolutely fantastic. The clone, which Adam Baldwin also voices, has a couple of good little quips as well. When he discovers that there's kryptonite in his forehead that Lex embedded in him, he's walking out and says "afternoon, ladies" to the ladies at the salon he's coming to kind of cut the thing out of his head. And a safe Superman is a safe Metropolis or something like that. There's a lot of really good quips, and Adam Baldwin puts enough of a little bit of a variation on his voice to make the clone sound a little bit unhinged. So there's lots of little good elements like that. Again, across the board, the voice actors are all fantastic, I thought. The plot itself, it's pretty basic. It's just a big fight scene followed by another big fight scene with some interconnecting story points in the middle of it. That being said, the fights are properly brutal. The opening fight between Superman and Doomsday is up there in just terms of overall destruction that you really didn't ever get to see in the original Superman cartoon, where things would get destroyed and blown up, but they're leveling a whole freaking city. It reminded me of the final fight between the Justice League and the Injustice Society versus Darkseid and his forces as they come to Earth to try to destroy it at the very end of Justice League Unlimited, where the city is just getting absolutely destroyed, and Superman has that great, monologue about how he can finally cut loose and beats the ever-living crap out of Darkseid. It reminded me of that. There are these great moments where Superman grabs Darkseid over his head in his mouth and just overheads him and just like slams his head into the ground. Doomsday pushes Superman's head into a train and it just grinds it, and the gut punches that Doomsday delivers to Superman as they're fighting are absolutely visceral, and seeing and you can feel the impact of as Superman takes each hit and is coughing up blood, and just it's properly brutal, as is the same with the fight scene between the Clone and Superman as he's shown up in his very well recreated black solar suit and super mullet. If you've read the original comic series, The Death of Superman and Return of Superman, he shows up in this black suit and with a mullet. And they're beating the crap out of each other, and you can get that they're both very much on the side of good, but the Clone is a cracked mirror. There's a great line about being a cracked mirror that's kind of thrown with the fight banter, and it really kind of drives home that both of these supermen want to be Superman, but there's only one real Superman, and that's obviously the original. And so the Clone, has its own kind of distorted view of reality and what justice looks like in his eyes, being a clone and all that. But the fight scene there is just absolutely fantastic. The funeral scene where the citizens of Metropolis are coming and laying roses on his gravesite at this impressive memorial is incredibly impactful. Seeing Lex show up. It's actually very reminiscent of the episode from Justice League Unlimited Hereafter, in which Superman apparently dies at the hands of Toyman, but instead gets blasted into the future. Again, if you haven't seen those episodes, go watch them. Justice League Unlimited is probably the definitive Justice League storyline. All of it, once it gets a little bit more serialized and there's not as many filler episodes, the interconnected stories are absolutely fantastic. And the funeral scene in that is very reminiscent of this, and I want to say they took a lot of elements from that to design this funeral scene in Doomsday. But it's very impactful. It's very emotional. You can the weight that Superman's death has on Metropolis and the world at large is very tangible. You can feel it. It's absolutely fantastic, though. The art direction, I can't speak to the art direction enough. It is so evocative of the Justice League and early 90s cartoons that it feels like it's just a very natural evolution. Superman does have these weird eye lines. I'm not quite sure what they're there for, but they kind of add some detail to his face. I don't really know what they're for, but they look all right. But yeah, the art style is just fantastic, and I can't speak to just how good these cartoons look. Being cartoons, there's a certain level of immaturity that you might expect. If you're unfamiliar with the media, but they're really well drawn and executed, and there's varying levels of I would say mastery within the animated universe that DC put together. There's some really great ones, and there's some not so great ones, but we'll get to those in due time. But the art style is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Things I didn't like, though. Again, Doomsday's in it for all about 5 minutes. He breaks out of the prison cell, he kills some workers, he goes to Metropolis, Superman and him have a fight, he punches him, he gets punched back, Superman, flies him into the atmosphere, kind of like he did in Dawn of Justice, and then crashes him back down to the ground. I would say that fight scene actually is shorter than the one in Dawn of Justice. Granted, this movie is, barely, I think it's only about 70 minutes long. 78 minutes long, so you can't fit a whole lot of content into it, but that fight scene it's pretty short. And there is no, that's just it. One of the biggest problems with Doomsday as a character at the point of its introduction. Obviously as we gone through the years, he's gotten a little bit more, flushed out. Superman Doomsday, where he becomes Doom, or Superman Doomed, where he becomes this Doomsday monster. It's a little bit more, thought out. But to begin with, Doomsday in this movie is just a big punchy guy who punches Superman because he's another big punchy guy. And in my, honest opinion, it's so hard to write a good Superman story, especially an action movie like this is, where when all you can really do with him is just show that he's punching things. There's some elements where he's talking about how I wish I could be more than just the world's strongman. He's trying to cure the common cold, I think, at the Forest of Solitude. So you can tell that there's a little bit more depth to this Superman, but there's just the problem of he's just super strong, he punches things, and therefore his villains must also be equally as strong and punch him back. And it just kind of creates, a very, artistically impressive fight scene, there's not a whole lot beyond just that of the fight. There's not a lot of, more, detail to it. It's just a fight scene, which is, fine for the first go-around of this animated universe. So yeah, Doomsday's in it for all of, 10 minutes at most. Which is kind of a bummer. I don't know how they could have drawn this out anymore. Maybe they could have included this at the end of the movie and had this sort of like maybe a sequel, which I think they honestly should have done, because if you have read the original Death and Return of Superman back in the 90s, which back when DC was all about, upsetting the status quo and bringing in, the hard edge of the 90s. We had Nightfall, in which Bane broke the Batman's back. You have the death of Superman. You have the death of Jason Todd. That was a thing back then. And, that set up this Return of Superman story that was preceded by the reign of the Superman. We saw Steel show up, Superboy, the Eradicator, the Man of Tomorrow, I believe is the character's name. 4 different Supermen show up and try to fight for the mantle of Superman, which would have been, I think, a pretty damn interesting movie to follow this up with. Have Superman and Doomsday kill each other at the end of this movie, and then set up Superman, Reign, perhaps, which, Spider-Man Reign is, different thing altogether, but might have been a cool a follow-up piece to this movie. But I understand why they did it. For the first go-around, you can't do something that epic. They waited until, a couple of years later to do a proper 2-parter of a proper resurrection story, and I cannot wait to get to that one. And I'm sure you guys, if you've seen a majority of these movies, know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, so it could have been a much bigger movie, but and I keep saying this, for the first go-around with this animated universe, they did a pretty damn good job. And that's really my only critique of the movie, is that it just feels kind of small. Obviously Superman and Doomsday is a very big fight scene, lots of punching, lots of destruction, lots of explosions, all very good if you're 10 or something. But as a more mature, viewer and a fan of comic books and their interpretations throughout the years, you maybe want a little bit more from your Superman stories, which, we get further down the line. Superman versus the Elite, I think, is a really good example of a really good Superman story that just doesn't revolve around Superman punching things, even though he does a lot of that in that movie. That's a really good example of that. Superman, I'm forgetting the name of it now. Which one is it? It's All-Star Superman. Another really good example of a really good Superman story. And kicking this whole thing off just kind of set the groundwork for them to just go higher and higher and higher. And we will get to those really good examples of good Superman stories. They are here, and I cannot wait to review them, because I've got a lot to say about those stories. So that's my interpretation of Superman Doomsday. It's no death of Superman, and honestly, that's probably a good thing, because that storyline back in the 90s was a bit of a mess, if I'm being completely honest. As a good jumping off point for the DC animated universe, really good, not bad. I know I'm not giving these a grade, but it's pretty darn good. It's good for just pure popcorn value. Has some great voice acting, has some great music, has some great fight scenes, and at the end of the day, it tells a pretty good Superman story to kick this whole thing off. So, did you like Superman Doomsday. What did you think about it? You know, what was your favorite part of it? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My plan is to do these at least once a week, maybe every other week, depending on schedules and things like that. But there are a lot of these movies to get through. You know, we'll be doing the standalone films, the Batman and Superman shared universe films, Public Enemies and Apocalypse, and then the movie universe, which starts off with War and goes up through the Judas Contract. But that's kind of my plan here, is to do all of these movies. And honestly, I might go back and do maybe the old ones, which were all the Batman movies. You know, Mr. Freeze, the Sub-Zero one, World's Finest, Mystery of the Batwoman. But I wanted to start off with these just because they're the more kind of connected ones, as it were. But I'm gonna try to get around to all of them eventually. But I thought this would be a particular place to start off with because this was the first one that I ever saw of the more connected universe. So let me know what you thought about this movie. I keep saying it, it's a good starting off point, and I cannot wait to review the rest of these. Definitely check them out every week, guys, but I hope you enjoyed this, and get ready to look out for the next one, Justice League: The New Frontier. Thanks for watching, guys.